Welcome to the Innovation Brief, the podcast where we have real conversations with leaders driving meaningful change across diverse sectors. I'm Gabriella Hernandez.
And I'm Matic. Each episode will bring you insights from innovators who are shaping the future through bold ideas, fresh perspectives, and transformative work.
And today we're joined by Sanjay Nand, the Head of Innovation and Ventures at Capgemini's Applied Innovation Exchange.
He works with large organizations to turn ideas into real-world outcomes. His work brings together emerging technology, design, and a strong focus on people. And he's also known for challenging assumptions and helping teams move from ambition to action.
Whether you're an entrepreneur, policymaker, corporate leader, or simply curious about the future of innovation, this conversation will give you a fresh perspective on how bold ideas, emerging technology, and human creativity can come together to make a real difference. So let's dive in. Welcome, Sanjay. Thank you for joining us. Could you please start by telling us about your role at Capgemini's Applied Innovation Exchange?
Thanks for having me. Certainly, love to tell you more about the role that I play in our company. So effectively, I'm in one of these very rare, fortunate situations where I get to play the role between our business across our organization who are looking to innovate with our clients, our client teams across a number of sectors. And also on the other side, I get to work with a great team who are made up of innovators, designers, developers, who are really looking at the cutting edge technologies of tomorrow and looking at how we can apply them today.
That sounds really, really exciting. But let's kind of go back to basics a little bit. When you say applied innovation, what does that really mean for you? And what does it mean day to day?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think foundationally at its very core, applied innovation is looking to solve real business problems. In our team, we're constantly talking about being problem obsessed, not technology obsessed. We're not an R&D house. We don't seek to prove technology for technology's sake. But moreover, anything we're creating, ideating about, or even just thinking, it's got to have a commercial element to it. And that could be an operational saving. That could be a profit driver. Really, those are the things that we class as applied innovation. It's got to be applied to a real business problem that exists, that can unlock new doors, create savings, create new opportunities. And the technology, whatever that presents itself to be, or the emerging partner, whomever that seeks itself to be, they're just the enablers into that.
That's amazing. And in your work, you've worked across so many different types of organizations, so many different industries. How do you drive innovation so that it's not just following trends? You're not just saying this is the next big thing, you should do this, but it actually really fits with each organization's purpose and the people that are a part of it.
Yeah, I think this question is really timely right now because we're in this age where everyone thinks you can get a quick fix with a bit of AI. Just the right prompt's going to unlock that business value. And having spent probably the last 2 years being really focused on projects that do involve AI, I've kind of learned firsthand what's not working. And what's great when we ask this question on, how do we ensure what we're solving for is so hypercentric to the industry? For me, it's some traditional things are proving their value more than ever before. So we're big believers in our team of ethnographic research, aka getting onto the ground, be it a shop floor, be it a manufacturing site, be it wherever real people are engaging with real systems and seeing how that happens, and just unpacking what that looks like in the realities of it. I think right now we're getting told AI unlocks all the insight, synthetic humans are going to give you all the insights. And the truth is that does play a role and it is additive, but it's definitely not the core. And what we find 9 times out of 10, when we spend that time having a coffee with someone that just spent 3 hours doing a role within a telesales role, and actually they've told us their pain points, we've observed those, and actually we can see the human element in all of that. That for me is what helps us consistently achieve things that are hyper specific to industries and those organizations, because an industry isn't an acronym as much as people aren't just personas. There's so much to be learned when you actually get to understand the culture of these companies.
That's a really, really good point. And you kind of had a question on AI after this, but you sort of answered that already. But I have a follow-up question on that. Maybe we can save some of our listeners a little bit of time, some of those innovation leaders that are thinking, how can I best use AI to potentially speed up things or do whatever? Can you spontaneously, appreciate not prepared, so we'll see, think of a use case that maybe sounds really impressive, that people on face value might think, oh, I should try that, I should use AI for that, but that actually in reality rarely delivers?
Yeah, so for me, would definitely be ideation. We see it embedded into the tools that you use. So if you're a fan of the online whiteboards, murals, whatever, fill in the blank, or even just your favorite note-taking app probably right now has a feature that lets you spit out ideas. 9 times out of 10, again, we see AI not coming out with the best ideas that are really unique. That's changing, to be honest with you, as context windows improve, the amount of information we can give to an AI improves, and actually the relevancy gets better. But on the whole, when we look to use it in that guise, I've been quietly disappointed. And that's mostly because if we think about how the technology works, at its simplest level, it baselines its embeddings on an average line, which means you're going to get average results and average ideas. And we think about applied innovation or breakthrough ideas, well, guess what? It's completely off that line, right? It shouldn't even exist on that line. So for me, it's a great example of where people will tend to use it in a space because they think it's going to give you 50 incredible ideas. When in truth, if you got one that's semi-decent on out of those 50, well done. But actually, if you just put the headspace and use AI for some more meaningless tasks, maybe some of the synthesis that you need, or structuring some semi-structured data, etc. And you can put your great human head into some ideation and play to those kind of outlier pieces of information that struck a kind of cultural nerve inside you. Well, that's probably where the golden nugget sits.
That is so spot on, 100%. I think there's a lot to be said for remembering, our human brains, and the fact that if we go straight to ChatGPT to ask for a solution or an idea, we're skipping a really, really important part where we are not ever really spending the time to see, what do we actually think about this? What does the breadth of experience and things we've seen in our lifetime, what comes up when we actually really, really think about that, rather than reading whatever's been recycled that others have said or published online. So really, really good point. We see it too often, I think, and the really, really good nuggets happen when we're still tapping into that human brain of ours that's, should still be working most of the time.
No, seriously. And I think you kind of touched on this. There is AI is becoming more and more embedded into the tools that we use and in just our everyday to-day lives. And it's here, more or less, at least for now, to stay. How do you feel that we as people can learn to more effectively kind of collaborate with it in terms of not just improving it, but improving the outputs that we get from it so that, we can dive more into those more meaningful kind of challenges and issues?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot in this space. It's kind of evolving as well, I'm sure, and I'm guaranteed if you ask me this in 2 months, let alone like 6 months, the answer might change a little bit because the technology is changing. So therefore, how we interact with it is growing. But how I've been approaching it, having spoken to different people, both my team outside of it, there's kind of a common train of thought, which is kind of don't build AI as a substitute for people, but rather build AI as a capability layer that makes us better at what we do. And for me, that kind of starts with thinking about it as roles, not features. So, okay, what role does a human have? Well, I have taste, I have values, I have accountability, I own relationships, and I own intent. That's a lot of what makes me human, is what gets me to tick. The AI can own things like speed, synthesis, first drafts, maybe potential options, but first needs to take my context, my taste, my relationships, and my intent from what I'm putting on the table. And then often I think it's also worth thinking about how you wish to use it. There's been a lot in the world of like prompt engineering around getting your prompt right. And I'm sure everyone's LinkedIn feed is played with 70 playbooks and you've got to comment, yes, please, and you'll get it. But for me, it's something that works quite well is just thinking, what kind of mindset do I want the AI to be in when I'm having a conversation with it? Is that explorative? Do I want divergent thinking? Is it decision-based, like convergent thinking? I'm trying to get it to help me analyze how I should make a decision. Or do I just want it to deliver a first draft, something that I can rip apart, but helps me go from 0 to 1? So for me, that's a lot about how I'm looking to work with AI. I think the biggest change more recently, and this is probably the last couple of weeks, but I might be late to the parties, just ensuring you're providing all the context. So earlier in 2025, it was all about great prompts. Now you can MCP, connect up whatever, database, research stack, whatever you've got. But that for me is creating such a wealth of difference now in terms of the symbiotic relationship I'm having with these agents or partners, call them whatever you will.
Let's go back to kind of away from AI and tech to the people, the strategists and innovation leaders out there. One thing I've definitely noticed, and I think AI is probably part of that, but is not the only reason this is happening, I believe. And generally, the roles we as innovation leaders have to, I almost said play, but the roles we have to play are shifting and evolving the same way technology evolves. And more strategists and innovation leaders are getting involved in directly building MVPs, building prototypes, getting involved in like the building rather than just defining the strategy. What do you think is driving that shift? What have you observed in your field?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I'll start first with like the industry shift that I've seen, and then maybe translate that down as to how that's showing itself with individuals' roles and responsibilities and the changes that are happening there. So I suppose at an industry level, I'm quite a fan of the change that's happening because we're moving from a world where you could get away with an idea on a slide and lots of great things written down. Now we're seeing organizations, almost every single one of them saying, don't tell me, show me. Put it in my hand. And if you can't put it into my hand, why are we having this conversation? Some of the best clients I work with are the ones that are pushing us to make it real even quicker than we might see it feasible. And it's that shift, and that shift's definitely come from a few things. One, it's probably come from a series of steady investments on a strategy that may not have panned out, and therefore there's been reluctancy there. There's been a technology angle in regards to this, on a personal level, even if we take out the enterprise part of it, everyone adopting AI in their lifestyles, be that they go to a Gemini or a ChatGPT before they go to a Google, like in their personal lives. So the speed at which they're expecting answers and the trust in it. And then obviously the vibe coding sphere, which has completely exploded and is kind of exploding on a daily basis, depending on where and what pieces you're plugged into or following. Those are the kind of the macro elements that I've seen. There's elements of economic shifts there, plus individuals embracing this technology and expecting it in the workplace. In the workplace, I suppose some of the roles that I'm really seeing change, there's a couple, and to be honest, they're all merging so quickly. And as someone that has to manage people who have these roles, it's really exciting, nerve-wracking all at the same time. One clear space is when we look at design and developers and how that space is really coming together. There's no shortage of what I call now like design engineers is like a new role type that we're seeing become popularized within the tech sphere based in San Fran, and it's kind of making its way across. And these are individuals who, from what I've seen at least, traditionally have come from a design background. They've always not had the skills, the hard technical skills to be able to make it real. Yes, they could have put it into Figma, do a lot of work to make it feel like a clickable prototype, but it's never real. Now you've got these same individuals empowered with a cursor, a Vercel, a Replit, a fill in the blank, and they're actually able to go from their design to working code. There's entire repositories of designers sharing courses on how to be more familiar with Git. And Git and GitHub was like a place where designers would stay hellishly away from in previous times. It's the place you go for developers and where they're pushing their builds, etc. So that's definitely a role that's changed. It's changing extremely quickly to the point where I think even designers, they've gone from the arc of, oh my God, AI is taking my job because it can now create these prototypes with a few prompts and images, all the way through to, well, hang about, my value proposition has 10x because I can now do more of the stack. I'm not just in this one box. And it's those designers that are really shining through right now. They're biting at understanding the end-to-end process. So that's one. The second big one is in the innovation strategy space, right? If we think about the old model of innovation, it was you do a trend scan, you learn some insights, you do an ideation workshop, there's a concept deck, and you hand over a product, and then you've got a backlog that you've got to keep grooming and making. Now it's shipping functional artifacts. So we pick a wedge, a really painful, specific problem that if we don't solve it soon, there's going to be real carnage. We prototype really quickly. There doesn't need to be a full-baked design system. We can test that in the real world. We can prove value really quickly. And sometimes that can be pound coins transacted, time saved, whatever that looks like. And then the adoption path gets really interesting too, if it's the training, the comms, and what that looks like. But that whole speed has changed. You've got strategists now who are building the prototypes. So they're kind of an innovation strategist slowly eating into the design space. Designers are going into the development space. So that's probably a long answer to simply say there's a lot changing really rapidly. It is a bit jarring, but it's super exciting at the same time.
Amazing. Like, I know you've kind of touched on quite a few things that we were actually going to touch on. But what I'm hearing in here is just like, it's so fast paced. There's all these new roles, mindsets, opportunities, tools that are kind of coming up that, like, as you said, in just even a few months' times and so on, you're dealing in a completely different reality. And it'd be really interesting to know for an innovation leader like yourself, how do you help to manage those rapid changes and manage your team and being able to adapt to that, so you don't feel overwhelmed, that you're able to actually not feel caught up by the hype? What are some of the tools that you use to kind of adapt to all of this?
Yeah, so I'll answer that in like two ways, I suppose. So on the first, like, how do you kind of create a culture where people are willing to embrace this? Not sure I'm doing the best piece. I'm quite free form with that with my teams. And that is very much from a place of I'm a big believer in exploration and learning by doing. So what you'll tend to find on our innovation engagements, almost every engagement, there'll be a moment where I'll ask the team to think about this beyond just the problem we're solving, but actually what's the way of working, the tool that we could test through this engagement. I'll give you a recent example. We were doing a piece of work within the public sector space, and one of the key things we need to do is to showcase day in the life, showcase how this concept that we're currently vibe coding up at the moment, how that's going to play a role in the end-to-end journey. It needs to be a video that brings it all to life, but equally at the same time, bring the vibe coded piece into the hands, and it's got to be consumable within a kind of 30-minute piece. Great time for us to get hands-on with video editing within the Gen AI sphere, be it VO 3.1, be it using a bit of Descript, be it using lots of different other tools. That's an opportunity. We could have said, actually, on this engagement, let's just do it how we've always done it and take a traditional video production path. Let's not try these new tools. So almost every engagement now that we run, I'm asking the team, what are we trialing in addition to this project? So there's a project, we're going to hopefully solve the customer problem, obviously, but what's the thing? Is it a tool? Is it a way of working? Is it a methodology? What is it? Because they're all novel ways to let you try these things in a real founded problem. And for me, that's 20 times better than saying, go spend a week online and learn about this technology that you might one day use against a fictitious business problem that you'll never use, because actually we don't solve for those types of things here. So that's a big part for how I'm trying to look to instill that behavior, kind of knock myself a bit, because I think we're now in that phase as a team where, yes, we're doing a lot of experimentation. And if you look at the industry narrative right now, it's like, we're going to move away from experimentation and go into what are our hardcore paths. I don't know how I feel about that. It's a bit controversial because it's against maybe the industry trend. I see that we do need to make decisions in the areas that these tools can help us move really quickly. And for me, that's some of the easy stuff, the operational stuff that humans shouldn't be spending their time on. Have some agents do your timesheets, have some agents do some of that easier stuff. That for me is a no-brainer to be going after. The second layer up, where I do think it gets a bit more trickier, is where are you picking your bets in regards to what you're building in your stack? Are you a Notion house and therefore you're paying full whack to use all the AI tools and you've MCP'd that into everything you use? Are you getting every single one of your employees to use Claude Cowork and actually now everyone has an agent there and you're paying $100 to $200 per month per employee that you have? What is your bet? And actually, how do you orchestrate that? That I find a really challenging conversation because the ground is shaking up underneath our feet daily. If you speak to any leader, they're probably feeling the same thing. But going back to the original piece, I think you just got to make some bets and see what you learn. Again, right now, it's the beginning of the year. we've stuck a conversation with our entire team to say, are the rituals that we have serving us well for what we're trying to achieve? Because we're going to shake them up, and we shouldn't think so differently with tooling. I think sometimes with tooling it can feel a bit rigid because you're like, oh, we've put all this money and time into this thing. Yeah, but you wouldn't feel that way about a project or a ritual. So why do you feel that about a tool? So hopefully a bit of an answer across what we're doing, where I see some of the challenges individually, and then what we're going to look to do moving forwards.
I love that. I think that's really, really insightful. And you touched on a lot and gave some really practical examples of how you do that in practice. And also to flag, obviously, for those who might not know it, when you say the industries you're in, a lot of the time, those are more of the kind of heavier, sometimes even safety critical industries. And that obviously is different than building in, I don't know, a space where an experiment, even if it fails, doesn't really impact people's safety or, I guess, the bottom line in a meaningful way. It's interesting because I think every leader, or in my experience at least, that I've come across, has a different take on this. I wonder, just to follow up on that, when you say experimentation, and obviously experimentation, the result oftentimes is failure and something doesn't work. Where do you draw the line? What's the kind of stuff where people can play and potentially mess up? But where do you kind of set that boundary to keep things safe in, for example, industries that you might be operating in? And I don't know, how has that planned out in practice? Because, for example, we've done a lot of work in aerospace. There's very little leeway in, experimenting. You don't experiment in, production. You hardly have any sandboxing generally when it comes to kind of particularly hardware related or very, very high tech, high capital intensive solutions. Yeah, anyway, maybe some insight for those particularly hard industries from you.
So for me, there's a couple of filters I could try to use in my head. One of those is sensitivity. So if we're in an industry and the thing we're looking to experiment around is going to create, national security risks, etc., you can bet your bottom dollar we're probably not going to do it to the level of experimentation. But then if the sensitivity is high, and then the next place I go to, because you still want to push for experimentation, is process or topic area. So let's just play the hard example, right? Let's play that hard example through. If we're doing something within a really secure space, it's very tricky. You do not want to end up changing or making risks on the production line or anything in that site. Well, if we take a few clicks back, there's going to be activities that the team is doing that aren't maybe directly related to that piece, but could be reinvented with experimentation. So, for example, if we're going to do some consumer insights and actually we're going to be doing interviewing, why don't we try experimenting with a new bit of hardware? That could be an AI pin that listens and records everything. Yes, we're going to synthesize it. And again, to be clear, it would be like an on-premise device. Nothing to the cloud before I get into trouble. Or moreover, there could be a moment where you're looking to distill a large amount of information to a number of individuals where an email is not going to work, a deck is too cumbersome. But actually something like a Synthesia created piece where you've got a human that's talking it through, that shifts the engagement from a change management perspective. So I think there's always like a sub-process you can experiment within. That would be my guys. I think also there's always, for me, there's the end deliverable that you're driving, and then there's a process to get there. And sometimes it's better to separate those to figure out where you can do the experimentation, because we can often, if we just look through the deliverable lens, it feels really hard because it's so finite. We must achieve this, it must achieve these KPIs, etc. And you don't want to risk that for all the right reasons. But actually, if you look at the process in getting there, be it Double Diamond, be it Stingray model, whatever you're leveraging and using, well, there, I think that's where you have your place for experimentation and how that shows up. I'll give you one final example, and I'll stop rambling on. We did a project recently where, as part of it, we said, why don't we have lots of calls, we have lots of meeting notes, we have lots of SharePoints, all that usual stuff. Why don't we have a centralized AI that's kind of sitting on top of everything? So actually, it's our co-agent or co-pilot, whatever you want to call it, that we can be questioning. So if someone's joining the project late, it can be used to bring them up to speed on what the project's about. If you've missed a meeting, you can do the usual, what did I miss, what are the key points? But then you can do some really interesting things to say, what are the things we're not talking about that we should be talking about in this project? Who are the personas that we've forgotten about as we're now week 8 of 12, and actually our headspaces have gotten a bit jarred and we're a bit too heads down? And it's those conversations that I feel like so many people are still not having with this technology. If you've got something that's completely grounded on the information that's deterministic on what you've given it, one, there's a huge lack of chance of hallucinations. But two, you can ask it some really tricky conversations. These large language models are built for language. So have those spicier chats with it, because those are the bits of golden nuggets that we can never really get.
So I think that we've touched on something just now where you're saying, like with everything that's kind of like changing so fast, particularly in the human and tech collaboration kind of space, what's a major cultural or organizational, emotional kind of shift that you're seeing that many organizations you feel haven't really yet taken the time to properly think about and prepare for?
Such a good question. How long have you got? Yeah, it's such a good one. It's so good because there's so many and it's so different for every client and customer and what have you. I think there's a couple of big ones in there that I'm seeing at the moment. The first one's the easy one. I think we're all seeing, right? It's individuals getting caught up in the hype. And traditionally, some leaders who haven't maybe played enough with a system, tried to build something themselves on a weekend, connect up a few interfaces or MCP, a few connections and see how that all works. Grabbing the hype of AI, right? They're seeing all these incredible pitch demos from Y Combinator and LinkedIn feeds, etc. And then coming into the boardroom or coming into the meetings to say, well, just throw this at Gemini, it'll give us the answer in 15 minutes. And I've had a couple of these experiences, and I've had to almost go back and say it very directly. If you want some AI slop, sure, carry on. But I'm not going to entertain that type of thinking. So that's probably the obvious one, right? We see leaders that are really, they're drinking the Kool-Aid, but haven't had a chance to actually have a play. Because the minute you have a play, I think the reality dawns on you that it is incredible at so many things, but it gives you a false sense of confidence, especially when you move from pilot to production scale. That is a huge leap. We've done a number of projects recently where we're scaling AI. Boy, can I tell you about the lessons learned that we're getting in that space. So that's the big one. It's, controlling yourself on the hype and where that looks to. The other, it's kind of interconnected. Right now, it's how do you help your workforce? There's a lot of people looking at AI to help shift your proposition, drawing operational savings. I think those are, again, looking at the consumer. And actually, the first people they should look at is their customer. Sometimes their customers are their own staff. And how do you help the staff what they're after? I've seen no shortage of tools that people believe are actually useful. Speak to 20 people, no one wants it, no one cares for it. They'd rather just have a better, less ugly HR system or less clunky time reporting piece. Fill in the blank. There's 1,000 small cuts that cause pain with employees that you could just remove, versus creating a novel pet project that is kind of grounded in, it would sound great on a headline, but in truth, its use is so limited to so few, it's not really relevant. Final bit I'll mention, it's this whole AI being used to create operational savings, or do you use it as a kind of profit driver? I shouldn't say, I don't know if it's a good opinion or bad opinion. I think both are interesting. I think right now, the operational saver is getting convoluted. When you look at the numbers, when people say we saved so much time thanks to Y solution, sometimes that's just because the process you had before was a bad process. So actually, you haven't really saved much. You just stopped doing something that was always a bad thing to be doing. AI didn't really help you with that. That's one bit. And the second bit is if you can look at areas where profitability can get increased, I think those are the really hard ones. So I think people should put their efforts towards that space because it's hard. And I'm a believer in kind of, strong friction. If you're having a really strong debate, it means you're probably onto something quite good.
100% agree on that. And it's really, really interesting. I think it's this really not even balance currently between, you mentioned those that really, have embraced it, drank the Kool-Aid, almost embraced it too much. And then those where there is some resistance and they usually work next to each other in offices and do things. And I've also noticed a lot when it comes to resistance, or it comes even resistance to just training to use AI, not even further along. There's also a big element that hasn't really been discussed yet, which is around identity and how, you have experts and people who have worked for years, for decades in certain fields, and you have potentially technology challenge their authority and their knowledge in a way that none of us are, I think, prepared for, or isn't, I guess, managed in a way that's useful. So that's an interesting one to monitor, I think. How can we, thrive alongside rather than fight it?
Completely agree. There's something to be said about, I read a quote recently which opened my eyes up. It's showing how OpenAI's GPT, I believe it was 4.0 or 4.5, was trained on about 4 petabytes of data. JP Morgan have over 2,000 petabytes of data. So like that alone is like jaw-dropping in the sense of we tend to really cheerlead these LLMs, Claude, Gemini, OpenAI, etc. We tend to then forget how much data within our organizations we have that is far and beyond and actually focus in on what the mission of this organization is. And that's not even including the tacit knowledge that lives in people's heads, right? So yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's so much. I often find myself on a daily basis saying to people, look, this is how I think it's going to play out. Why? Because I've experienced it 10 times before. There's signals that you can't see, read, but I can sense, and it's intuition.
Yeah. Or a lot particularly when it comes to working with small companies and startups, we get that a lot with our clients. We're like, listen, we've seen this before. This situation has played out like this. And, sometimes it's, the instinct that you need to use to handle those delicately.
A bit earlier, you talked about kind of that convenience aspect. Like many people are now just going on to ChatGPT, plug in a question, expect a like quick, easy answer. And when you're talking about solving those really difficult issues, which requires a bit more digging and so on, that's a lot harder. And I guess one of the questions that we have is like, at a time when people are just obsessed for that convenience, easy results, quick results, fast results, how do you keep curiosity and, kind of the creative, fun, but also hard side of it alive in the process?
I think at the moment, curiosity is really going through a bit of a weird wave. I was saying to my partner the other day how rare now I'm finding it where friends are reaching out just to ask for advice on something. Or I see in the workplace where fewer and fewer people are asking each other for advice. And I think a lot of that is just an assumption. It's coming down to people going to these AIs and assuming that that'll come into a good answer. I took a recent trip to New York and I made a point not to use any AI for restaurant recommendations. I just went to 3 friends who I know they're absolute foodies. They're much more foodies than I am. I got their restaurant recommendations. I then did plug those into an AI to tell me the best routes or which ones to try first, etc. But my curated list was human-led because, again, they've got taste buds and they don't just rely on reviews that might be paid for. But back to that curiosity piece, I share that story because I think it's telling of what we still need to be doing as humans, which is I think there's this huge vacuum right now. I was saying this to my team, which is in human conversations. There's far less of them happening. Everyone is turning to an AI or YouTube, etc., to find answers. And actually, what that means is, as humans, we are built for connection. There's a huge vacuum there. And I would be the people that fill that vacuum. I would be the one taking people out for coffees right now, going out for dinners, remembering that actually most business, most ideas are started off by a conversation. So I'd lean into the fun moments. We're doing next week, we've got a retail event. And as part of that, we're going to be taking our clients to some of the big retail places on Oxford Street to showcase how emerging technologies is changing customer experience. I say all this because in the research, we're figuring out, where do we go, which shops to visit, who's got the most novel experiences. We could have done that behind a desk, could have done a lot of Googling, ChatGPT, etc. It's pretty boring. We'll just go to this high street. And that's what we did. We spent a day or two just doing some traditional jungle safari, working out what's interesting. Yes, we use a little bit AI and traditional Google searching to help narrow us down a bit. But it's one thing to read about these things. It's another to experience it, build a connection with these retailers who are later going to be bringing our clients to visit them versus shooting a cold call email, which has no human sympathy. So you talk about curiosity. For me, it's doing that, leaning in onto the fun moments, fill that vacuum where human conversations are whittling through, and pick what to do with no expectations.
That's 100% accurate. I think You made a really interesting point when you said people have kind of stopped asking each other questions. And that struck me just while you were talking. I thought that's actually a really, really good point, whether that's out of fear that you might look kind of uninformed, or you might as well ask ChatGPT or whatever. But if I think back, the amount of times where back in the day, before AI, or in different teams, I've seen a simple question, a really simple, basic question, change the direction of a certain project or strategy completely, just because it was innocently asked in that moment, rather than, not even expecting a good answer to it. You know what I mean? Just kind of opening up a whole other space for creativity and different problem solving. So yeah, doing lots of more like that in person, I think, is key. So I think you're on the right track on that front.
Yeah, I something like I live by, which I really embrace over the last couple of years. I often get colleagues that say, like, especially when their heads down in a project and they're looking for inspiration, and they're like, they just need to feed the hopper. I'll often just say, just go out and get more dots. And that can mean go to an art gallery, that can mean just going for a walk, that can mean doing a shop floor visit, go to the production line. Just get more dots, because you're probably just lacking dots, and the more of those you can connect up. As exactly as you say, I love nothing more than actually something that was innocently led, but completely shifts the direction of travel. But that only happens because someone was willing to have that conversation and others were willing to build upon it and diverge and converge. When we do whenever we work with these AIs, it tends to, again, one, push us towards a median of average. So it kind of dilutes our thinking. But two, it's like in a vacuum. Like no one's joining you in that conversation apart from you and whatever platform you're using.
Great point, Sanjay. That's a nice segue, actually, to one last question I had. Who would you like to be in a conversation with about that sort of stuff? Are there any leaders or people in the innovation space that you genuinely admire? Someone whose work, you think has created real impact and has influenced the way you work?
I kind of knew this one was coming, so I've actually cheekily got 3 names. They're all very different individuals in completely different stratospheres. One is probably an obvious one. It's Astro Teller, who leads Google X, their moonshot factory. Learn a lot from the playbooks, the way they operate, how they treat experimentation and failure. Second is someone I actually have spoken to once or twice, and he's just an awesome guy, John Laplore. He's a co-founder of a company called Black Box Infinite. They're the folks that you might have seen that created the technology you see in Black Panthers, like vibranium sand. So his organizations do a lot of VFX, etc., is really thinking about what are the concepts that find themselves into movies and sci-fi, or F1's augmented reality laps piece. They are the ones that are looking at where's that future taking us? How do you bring that to humans in today? And the final person's a bit different. Andy Allen from the Not Boring Company. If you are on the Apple App Store, they're not on Android yet. If Andy could get them on Android, that'd be great. They have what they're called not boring apps, and effectively they're reimagining everyday apps like the calculator, the calendar, the camera, but they're doing it in such a beautiful, artistic way that helps you remember actually the way human-machine interfaces are meant to work, are meant to be novel, exciting. And his company is they're just doing things that I think we need much more of.
Well, I knew at least one of those names, but the others I'll have to look up. So thank you so much for the recommendations. And maybe one day we'll see them or hear them in the innovation brief. Thanks for that. So thanks, Sanjay, for sharing your insights with us today. What's next for you and your team? How can listeners connect, learn more about it? Anything you'd like to suggest so we can share and people can support your work?
So we maintain a Medium blog, which is probably where you can find out the work that we're up to or have just achieved and accomplished. In there, you'll hear about that work, but also some of the bits that we're doing around like thought leadership, be that the interconnection between UX and UI, or the world in which our 26 conversations for 2026. That's found on our Medium blog, which is medium.com/applied-innovation-exchange.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sanjay. And that's a wrap on this episode of the Innovation Brief. And big thanks to Sanjay Nand for reminding us that innovation isn't just about technology. It's about people, imagination, and the courage to experiment. Here's to breaking things, learning fast, and making the world better along the way.
And if you have enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to Innovation Brief and leave us a review. It helps other innovation leaders and curious minds discover the show. And we'll be back next time with another inspiring conversation. This has been the Innovation Brief. I'm Gabi Matic.
And I'm Gabby Hernandez. Thanks for listening.